All right, let's look at review sheet number 16, which is there such a word as redo? Is that okay, Kate? Okay. You remember last week I gave you the number 15, and I don't know why I didn't just call this 15. But I garbled some stuff, and so I wanted to correct that today. Now, I'm not going through the matching because we did that last week, except for those of you that might not have been here. I'll go through it and just give you the letters and not say any comment about them. B, 2 is G, 3 is I, 4 is J, 5 is C, 6 is F, 7 is D, A is A, 8 is A, 9 is E, 10 is H. 9 is E, 10 is H. Now, here is Wiersbe's outline that I wanted you to be sure and get in your notes. How are you going to spend the rest of your time? Which is what Simon Peter asked. How are you going to spend the rest of your time? However long that might be. Number one, he says, you should spend it in a militant attitude toward sin. A militant attitude toward sin. And there's three things under that helps you to develop a militant attitude toward sin. Think what sin did to Jesus. Think what sin did to Jesus. Number two, enjoy the will of God. Enjoy the will of God. And he says, number three, remember what you were before you were saved. Remember who you were before you were saved. Now, for some of us, that's easy. I was saved at 18. For some of you who are saved as children, that makes it a little more difficult for you to remember what you were, except you do remember you are a sinner to be saved by grace. That's essential. All right, number two, not only a militant attitude toward sin, but a patient attitude toward the lost. A patient attitude toward the lost. Under that, two things. Expect lost people to act like lost people. Now, what's the antithesis of that? Expect God's people to act like God's people. So the expectancy. Now, number two, remember you are not saved from bad to good. That's part of it. You are saved from death to life. Paul says you are dead in your trespasses and sins, but God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us, by grace are you saved. Ephesians chapter 2, about verse 5.
Please repeat all that.
Saved from death to life, not just from bad to good. And sometimes it takes a while after you're saved, when you've been in the mode of being bad, it takes a while to start doing good. When you have the habits of a lifetime, it's kind of tough. That's why I always say to people, God saves you from some things, as well as saving you to some things. He saved me from some things, as well as to some things. I had to break some habits, and I could not have done it without the power of God's Holy Spirit. Just could not have done it. So, as a result, now all of you were good all of your life. I understand that. I'm talking about me. So remember, saved from death to life. And number 3 is the 10 Commandments, which is the matching up above. All right, number 3, baptism has 3 components. 1, it is a physical and spiritual act. A physical and spiritual act. Number 2, it is the pledge, and that was the only word I could come up with, pledge of a good conscience. The Bible says saved people ought to be baptized. Not to be saved, but saved people ought to be baptized. You are saved because you are. You're baptized because you are saved. And it paints that picture. Number 3, it depends. Baptism has its dependency in the resurrection. In the resurrection. I am raised to newness of life. I am raised to newness of life. Now on the backside, 4 principles of prayer. You probably have these in your notes earlier, but let me be sure you have them. Prayer is something you have to do in order to do. It just doesn't come naturally, except when you're in crisis. But you ought to be praying more times than just during times of... It never ceases to amaze me how spiritual people can get during crisis. How many promises I've had as a pastor. When I get out of this hospital, I'm coming back to church. I ain't seen them yet. In crisis. In crisis. But you have to pray in order to pray. Number 2, it has no time or space limitation. I've used as my illustration, I prayed for 42 years on a rather regular basis for my brother to be saved. For 42 years. Now that, you might say, well, that tells me something about your prayer life. No, it tells you something about his hostility. And he was saved in a revival I was preaching in the little town where he lived. 42 years, at 64 years of age. Number 3, and this probably is the greatest principle of all. I wish I'd have thought of it first. I got it from someone. Prayer may not change things for me, but it will change me for things. Have you ever prayed about something and it got worse rather than better? Of course you have. So have I. But I'll tell you what, the consistency of that prayer for what was going on, you became a better person as a result of it. Changes me. Number last, prayer brings God into everything else we do. Prayer brings God into everything else we do. Okay, the next 3 thoughts on suffering. 3 thoughts on suffering. You may already have these, but I wanted to be sure you do. Suffering is considered the purifier of the soul. As fire purifies gold, suffering purifies our life, our soul. Number two, it helps me get ready to do right. It helps me to get ready to do right. And number three, it integrates the gospel into my life. It integrates the gospel into my life. When you're suffering, you probably pray more than at any other time. But you can't wait until you start suffering in order to pray about suffering. I can assure you of two things in the Christian life. One is you're going to suffer. Two is you're going to die. Those are just two natural things of life. Now, and whatever you do with the suffering should integrate the gospel into your life, make you a better person. All right, any repeats? That's good. All right, let's turn to the last few verses of chapter 4. Last two verses of chapter 4, and then we'll get into chapter 5, which I want to get into today. All I need to do is find my notes. All right, the last few verses of chapter 4, beginning with verse 17, I believe. For the time has come that judgment must begin at the house of God. And if it first began at us, what shall the end be to them that obey not the gospel of God? Now, all he is simply saying here is that there is a time when you must make decision about judgment. Judgment is going to come in two ways. Judgment will come for those who do not know Jesus, a condemnation to hell. It will come. And also, it will come to the child of God in what is known in Scripture as the Bema judgment, where we stand and God judges us for what we have done with what he did in Jesus Christ. That's the Bema judgment. Rewards. Rewards. Now, my theology is that cannot happen immediately. It must happen at the end of time, because when I die, my influence does not die. It goes on. It goes on in the life of my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. Your life, the influence of my life becomes part of the influence of your life. Now, it may be small, but I cannot be judged completely until the end of time for what I have done with Jesus Christ. Now, the same thing is true. You remember the story of the rich man in hell? There's a great gulf between us. You can't get out, and I can't come to you. Send someone from death to tell my brothers. You know what he said? He said, no. If you will not hear the prophets, if you will not hear the preachers, if you will not hear the message of the Bible, they wouldn't hear somebody if they were raised from the dead. That's the interesting thing about the book of Revelation. The worse things become, the more hostile lost people become. They don't turn and repent. They get more hostile than ever before. God's doing this to us. God's doing this. No. You do it to yourself by missing the gospel. So it comes at the end. Now, that's a different lesson altogether. Just to be sure we understand. Judgment begins at the house of God. We must be sure, number one, that we are saved. Number two, that we are doing God's will. Now, sometimes it's tough to do God's will. Don't think I'm making it easy. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's easy. I don't smoke, I don't chew, I don't run with those who do. Sometimes that's easy. But there are some times when God says, I want you to do this, and you struggle just a little bit with the will of God until you finally realize the best thing I can do is enjoy the will of God. Get at peace with the will of God in your life. Whatever that might be, at this age and stage, whatever it might be, get comfortable with it. The decision may be difficult, but get comfortable with it if it's the will of God. So he says it must begin at the house of God, because if those who are without Christ, if listen to him again, and the righteous scarcely be saved. Don't take for granted everybody's going to be saved, as some folks do. And I was talking with someone earlier. Purgatory is not a possibility. Just know that. The decision is made in this life for heaven and hell. Purgatory is not a possibility. You're not going to get out. Okay? Now, the last. He talks again about suffering and committing yourself to Christ. Now, in chapter 5, he takes a completely different turn, and he starts talking about some specificity in taking care of the flock, the sheep. And I want to discuss this with you this morning. The elders which are among you I exhort. I am also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that be revealed. Verse 2, feed the flock of God, which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre or money, but for a ready mind. Now, I want to talk to you first of all about this idea of the elder, the pastor, the overseer. In the scripture, I'm convinced the elder is the same thing as the bishop, who is the same thing as the pastor, who is the same thing as the shepherd. Now, I think we have taken out of context the word elder. I pastored the First Baptist Church of Aledo, Texas, which was almost 100 years old when I became pastor of the church. They had their minutes from the first business meeting they ever had, written with quill and ink. I read every one of them. I was amazed. Elder was a term they used for the pastor of their church. Elder Smith, Elder Jones. Now, I think that's proper. I'm going to show you in a moment why I think it's out of context that we use it many times. So this idea of the elder. Now, I think also this same office in the New Testament both mean overseer. one who oversees the flock or shepherds the flock, as we'll see in just a moment. Now let me try to make the distinction. The ministry factor is elder, and the bishop factor is the administration. There are two sides of ministry, two sides, and you cannot escape either. There is the side which is ministry. If the sheep gets bruised, I put the oil on. If the sheep gets out of the flock, I try to get them back in. That's ministry. But administration is, how many sheep do I have to take care of? The administration is, and by the way, you do not solve spiritual problems by administration any more than you solve administrative problems scripturally or by Scripture, which simply means there are times as an administrator where you have to make some hard decisions that may not even seem in keeping with ministry. You just have to call somebody in and set them down and say to them, "You're fired." Then you tell them why. That's part of the ministry. I had a secretary one time who became expectant with her second child by the same man to whom she was not married. You know what she said to me? It's just part of the culture. I said, "Not this culture." I had to say to her, "You no longer have a job. Pack it up." I didn't have a choice. That's administration. It does not solve a spiritual problem. She had the spiritual problem, not me. I was being an administrator. So there are two sides. If you could just know, if most folks just knew the pressures of ministry and administration as they come together. It's a tough assignment. It's a tough assignment, believe me. Now, so the elder that he talks about, and the shepherd that he talks about, and the bishop that he talks about in other places, these are the same folks. They have a responsibility for the spiritual oversight of the flock. Now, where does this get its rootage in parts? Some of what we're going to see. Well, some say it goes all the way back to Moses and Jethro. You remember Moses was killing himself, counseling the people? Jethro, his father-in-law, butted in and said, "Hey, if you don't get some help, you're going to die. You're going to kill yourself trying to take care of these people. You just can't do it all alone. You're doing it from daylight till dark every day. You can't do it by yourself." And so he called some out to be part of that ministry that was going to help people through the crisis. You take care of the hard cases. Let these take care of the easy cases. Sometimes that's hard to decide which is what. And some say even the Sanhedrin, the 70 that made up the Sanhedrin in the Jewish life, also is a takeoff of this as well. Now, I've been around long enough that I've seen about every use of the word elder. Let me just give you what I have found, what I have observed in Baptist life. Now, however people choose in their denomination to run their denomination, that's okay with me. That's okay with me. I may not like it, may preach against it, may have words to say about it. But listen, when I'm talking about elders, I'm not talking about a board of directors. Here's what I found, just in my experience. Board of elders that make decisions for the church. that make decisions for the church. And the pastor is only a counselor or an advisor to the board of elders. I have found that. Second, I've found elders where the pastor was an elder among the elders. He was one of the 7 or whatever. We had it happen to a young man in Orlando. He believed in the elder system, just gung-ho, set up the elder system in the church, small church, went on vacation, came back, and the other elders had decided he didn't need to be an elder any longer. And he was gone. They made the decision for the church. The pastor was an elder among elders. Then there is a board of elders that is led by the pastor, and that board of elders is the staff of the church. The ministers of the church are the elders. Now, we'd have a hard time having a board of elders being just the staff members of this church, because there ain't many elders in it. Just me and thee. Now, that's not a put down. That's just an understanding. Elders are elders by experience and by birthdays. And somebody can be a wonderful preacher, and we do have some wonderful preachers, but their experience is limited. I can show you more scars than they can. Now, please, don't go say to the staff, "Do you know Dr. Sullivan? I love these folks. I love them." Don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying an elder has to have some elder. He has to be older, in my understanding. Now, sometimes the elder board is an executive board and offers itself as an executive board, very close to the first one I mentioned. Then there is the board of directors in a church that act like elders in the church. I had that at Broadmoor Baptist Church. We had a board of directors because in Louisiana, if you set up a non-profit organization, you're supposed to have a board of directors for that non-profit organization. So we had a board of directors. They primarily dealt with the finances of the church. We did not have a finance committee. The board of directors handled the finances of the church. I was perfectly at ease with that. I was able to be in the meetings. I was not isolated. I was able to give advice. But it always came back to the church for a vote. Now, folks, that's a key for me. The key for me is the autonomy of the local church. Coming back to the church for a vote is a key for me. The Board of Trustees. Our Board of Trustees here, I think I'm saying this right. They are appointed by the pastor, and they serve with him. And when we come to a business meeting, they are sharing with us what business we need to know and what we need to vote on, because we have authorized them, now listen to me, we have authorized them to do certain things. And the larger the church becomes, the more significant it becomes that you not bring everything to the floor of the church for discussion. I was a member of a church that spent an hour and a half discussing raising the kindergarten price $1. An hour and a half. I was in a church and led a business meeting for 4 hours and 28 minutes on the dismissal of a pastor. There was no question in my mind. I was just there to moderate the meeting because he was guilty of a DUI, and it was in the newspaper. Now, even if it were not in the newspaper, I would have voted to dismiss any pastor that gets a DUI. Now, you can question that if you want to. I'm just telling you. I don't want a pastor who drinks booze. I just don't. And won't. There's too many churches that don't have that kind of pastor. Well, let me get off of that. It's the coming back to the church. And then I have found, I think maybe only one time in one church, so it's nothing rampant, where there is a teaching board of elders and an administrative board of elders, and the two never come together. Now, that's this word elder. Now, let me tell you my theology. Let me tell you what I believe the Bible's talking about. He's talking about a pastor. He's talking about a teacher of the Word of God, someone called of God. I think that's what an elder is. Now, we can set aside groups and we can call them elders if we want to, but the meaning in Scripture is just what I said. Pastor, shepherd, bishop, all the same thing. All the same thing. Overseer of the flock. Now, that's this word elder. That's more than you needed to know about it. That's this word elder. Now, this idea of Simon coming and understanding, he comes to talk about the flock. Now, remember, he's a fisherman. And fish do not act like sheep. He's a fisherman. So Simon has to be doing this from observation, not by experience. I doubt seriously if he had ever owned a sheep. Now, what I'm going to tell you just like Simon, I've never owned a sheep in my life. I'm just telling you what others say about sheep. What are the characteristics of sheep? Listen to him. An overseer of the flock. Verse 2, feed the flock. What are the characteristics of the flock? Number 1, I am told that sheep are clean animals. Not like cows. I can tell you about cows. I pastored twice in dairy farming communities. I can tell you about cows. I don't know about sheep. They are clean animals. Number 2, they tend to flock together. They enjoy each other's presence, apparently. They tend to flock together. Number 3, they are prone to wander. They will eat themselves off a cliff, I'm told. Prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Don't we sing it? We do. We are prone to wander. Next, they are considered to be less than brilliant. That's putting it mildly. I'm taking this from someone else. I never owned one in my life. I'm going to make some comparisons in just a moment. Number 5, they are useful in many ways. 1, milk. 2, meat. 3, wool. So they're furnishing some of the natural elements of life. food, clothing. They're very useful animals. The lambs. Now, a lot of folks like leg of lamb. The lamb. And then the last thing, sheep were used for sacrifice. Sheep were used for sacrifice. Now, how does that figure in to our comparison, him calling us the flock? Well, I hope it means you do like being together. The hardest thing about the pandemic with me was not COVID. The hardest thing was I don't get to come to church to see you. That was the hardest thing about it. Corporate worship is not the same as sitting in your pajamas in front of a television watching a show. It's not the same. Now, it is a good substitute to do that. Don't misunderstand. I'm glad we could do that. Technology allowed that, and I'm glad for it. But I was witnessing to a young lady the other day, and I said to her, "Where do you go to church?" She said, "I don't go anymore." She said, "I work 6 days a week. I don't go anymore." I got in the habit of watching it in my pajamas on Sunday morning, and I think I'm going to stick with it. I can't do that. I cannot do that. I want to be part of a flock. A flock. Corporate worship is very important to me. Now, prone to wander? Not as bad as I used to be. Prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. When you feel it, you better do something about it. Consider less than smart. I'm not going to touch that. As my daughter says, once you get there, there you are. Most people do not exercise their full intelligence, including the preacher. They say we only use a minute part of our brain. I don't know. I don't know how to evaluate that. All I'm saying is we ought to be like sheep and follow the shepherd. Next, be useful. And sometimes you may be used for sacrifice. I hope not. I hope not. Sometimes you will be called upon to sacrifice, and I hope you will when called upon. Now, that's some comparison. Now, the shepherd. What's the responsibility of the shepherd? Number one, to feed the flock. He makes that crystal clear. To feed the flock. Now, when you're hungry, you'll eat almost anything. That's why when you feed the flock, you'd better be careful what you're feeding them. You don't need to feed the flock a bunch of nonsense. Now, it's good to know some nonsense theology, but you ought to feed the flock out of the Word of God. Feeding the flock. Just like the Bible studies. Feeding the flock. Now, part of that also, let me just take the companion part of that. I have not only the responsibility of feeding the flock, I have the responsibility of teaching the flock how to eat. Teaching the flock how to eat. You need to know how to read the Word of God, digest the Word of God, live out the Word of God. Feeding the flock, but teaching you how to eat as well as feeding the flock. Second thing, the shepherd always led, never pushed. Always led, never. He was always out front. Out front. I've always believed being out front and being up front. If somebody's going to shoot me, they'll have to do it in the back. As a shepherd. As a shepherd. He always took the heat first, always. But he also found the secure places first. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. What does he do? He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still water. He restores my soul. He walks with me through the valley of the shadow of death and brings me out on the other side. Goodness and mercy. I look behind me. What do I see? Goodness and mercy trotting after me every day of my life. And when they no longer trot after me, what happens? I get to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's what it means to go through the valley. Remember, folks, the valley of the shadow of death is just that. It's a shadow. It's a shadow. Now, death is real. Death is real, and death hurts. But it's only a shadow for the child of God. Now, this idea of bringing out on the other side, the sheep sometimes going through the valley will get bruised, they'll get briars, and it's the shepherd's responsibility to anoint them with oil and help them to get over their hurts. That's what he's talking about. He anoints my head with oil. My cup sloshes, runs over. Well, the flock cannot be seen as a flock. It must be seen as individuals who make up a flock. No cookie cutting. Every individual different. Every individual needing different things. So this idea of oversight among the people, with the people. Now, I'm one of them, so I can criticize them. The two besetting sins of ministry is laziness and jealousy. The two besetting sins that I have found. Neither of these would be true of the shepherd. He would be called a hireling, not a shepherd. It's the shepherd that takes care of the sheep. Oversight. I had a mentor by the name of W.D. Laws who taught me a lot. He was the director of evangelism for the State Convention of Arizona and also the director of men's work. And I did the boys' work part-time while I was in college. And he would say to me, now just remember, John, you can't take someone you've ever been. You can't take someone to where you've never been any more than you can come back from where you've never been. He was simply saying to me the thing he's talking about in the elder. There are certain things. He taught me more about time management than I ever learned in college or seminary. And it was all occasioned when I picked him up 5 minutes late one time. Oh, that's when I needed that oil on my head. Taught me a lesson. Do you realize, now there's basically, I'll say close to 100 people in here. If I am 5 minutes late, I have wasted 5,000 minutes of time. 500 minutes of time. How many days is that? 20 days? I've wasted 20 days. I had never seen it in that light, but he taught me to see it in that light. So this whole thing that we know,